Students around the world are finishing their qualifications so they can get ahead in life and make their contribution. If you are studying, researching, or thinking about it, you will need practical tips, techniques, coaching, and support to help you get finished and be successful. I'm Peter Alkemer, the Student Success Coach, and welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I interview successful students and leaders in education so that you will learn everything you need right here. You will learn about writing, completing your thesis and other projects, planning, discipline, how to get more done, supervisors, getting published, getting finished, how to have the right discipline, and many other aspects of student life. Whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Google, or any other podcast platform, please leave a rating and a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Either way, please get in touch and let us know what you think of the show and what you want to hear more of. Please always check the show notes for links to courses, material, and plenty more so that you can use what you've learned in each episode, take action, and achieve your student success. Please also join the Student Success Coach community in our exclusive members-only Facebook group where I post regularly and you can interact with fellow students just like yourself. Remember, you can't do this alone, so reach out, get involved, and take advantage. It's my commitment to your success. Now for this week's episode. Thanusha, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. It's really great to have you on the show, and our listeners are just really interested in, whatever tips and techniques can help them, be successful. And success takes many forms, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that final goal of getting your degree, whether it's a PhD or master's or other type of qualification. It can also be, different stages. And I know that you've sort of managed to get through some early stages of your PhD, and I'm really keen to talk about that in some more detail. But before we get there, maybe just give us all a bit of background to yourself, and obviously, how you've landed up, taking on this incredible challenge of doing a PhD part-time while, having a big career in the banking industry. So Thanusha, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Peter, and hello to your listeners as well. So a little bit of background. I started, I guess, my professional career as an engineer and went into consulting, I think very much probably maybe a year or two after doing professional engineering training, our basic disciplines of sugar, oil, paper, and pulp. And after doing a stint in each of those industries, I joined the consulting arena and spent quite a bit of years in consulting, which I found hugely beneficial, both because I really enjoy learning. So it was really great from a learning journey perspective, but equally learning different industries. I then decided to be a mum, so I took some time off from work, actually, or consulting, a career that I really enjoyed. And post re-emerging, I guess, into the corporate arena, I went into banking and have been in banking for, I guess, the last 8 years. Actually, interestingly, banking wasn't my favorite industry. FMCG or CPG was. But I've actually enjoyed being in the financial services industry for the last 8 years. And that's when I actually started. I did an executive leadership program at London Business School. And at that point in time, I really didn't really want to do an MBA, but I did want to pursue my master's. And I think going on that learning journey of my executive leadership program, I actually realized that at that point in time, and it was 2005, we were talking, or 2015, sorry, we were talking largely around an entrepreneurial mindset. And before, it was a domain very much concentrated into startups and business ownership. And I began to see the value of infusing an entrepreneurial mindset or corporate entrepreneurship, and the value that it could bring to financial services, but also to large organizations. And that is the reason why I actually did my master's in corporate entrepreneurship and new value creation. And I think that's where the bug really caught me, because I realized the value in the material and the application in the world we're living in, and the fast pace of change, uncertainty, and ambiguity, and how we could create a new strategic capability that will help us as large organization renew ourselves. And as a result, I did my master's, and I think probably 2 years after completing my master's, I thought, maybe let me take the plunge of doing a PhD. I realized that there's still some research gaps in terms of how, because we live in a world that is resource constrained, and implementing corporate entrepreneurship actually requires significant amount of resources, and there are a number of influencing factors. So how does a large corporate actually prioritize implementation and resources in order to transform themselves? And that's how I guess I decided to do my PhD. I have to admit, the master's program, although exceptionally intense, because I did a full-time master's while working, the PhD is a beast on its own. I completed doing my passing panel and ethics approval, but I promise you, it hasn't been the easiest of journeys. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. So yeah, that's where I see myself, and the journey to actually, I guess, my topic for my PhD and actually continuing it. It's actually my need to learn more than anything else, and really discovering new knowledge to be able to apply it in my corporate context in order to drive value. So really, that's the true essence of it.
Wonderful, Thanusha. That's such a fantastic and interesting background, and just, I think incredible to see how you've landed into that PhD journey. And I guess, my sort of question off the bat, your need to learn, and I mean, sounds very similar to most of the students that I coach. And, we really see the value of, developing new knowledge and contributing, whether it's in the workplace or elsewhere. And, many students working and studying at the same time, so they can make that contribution almost in real time. But I mean, you sort of mentioned that you've been through a number of processes now at the beginning of your PhD, and would it be fair to say maybe a little bit of, frustration early on in the stage that, perhaps you haven't quite yet got to achieving these wonderful goals of answering these incredible questions, and maybe it's been a lot of paperwork and administration and seems quite tedious at this stage? I mean, just your early, honest, authentic thoughts. And I mean, we could have listeners also in the same boat at the moment. And are you seeing the light at the end of the tunnel to the point where you can get into the meat of what you want to research?
It's definitely a longer process than, I guess, your master's. So I came in with, I guess, a false version of what the PhD is. I felt, even though my master's was highly intensive for the 18 months that I had done it, I found it relatively easy. I thought, both from going through panel to actually, doing the research, to producing the report and the insights, fairly easy. And I guess maybe my false sense of reality was my first stumbling block when doing my PhD. Given that it was an easy master's program and I was doing it in a similar domain and not really changing it very much, and I was very clear on what the topic should be. Even as I got into the program, I guess I had a false sense, and that was the reality that I had to deal with, because it's an excessively slower process. So you're not really getting through the gates as quick as you had hoped to. And when I did my master's, the momentum is naturally there. And therefore you're always in the moment of thinking, ideating, and writing. Whereas with your PhD, because to get through those gates, the thresholds are significantly higher, the expectations are different. It actually takes a significant amount of time. So if I look back and think, what did I want my first year milestones to have been, and looked at the reality of what my first year milestones were, they were very, very different. And I have to admit that going through panel was definitely, a very stressful process, because you're so clear as to what you're wanting to research and what the value is, and then you go through the academic process of trying to prove its value and its uniqueness, which is different to a master's, I guess. And to be crystal clear before you start of exactly how you're going to execute on your study. I see the value post going through the process, but I have to admit, going through the process, there were a few meltdowns
Yeah, I mean,
along the way.
along the way. And I mean, I know you and I sort of interacted a little bit, and it was sort of, I think, interesting for me to relive, the same experience in my own PhD and the frustration that I also went through. And I think, when you go through that process of getting ethics approval to do research on humans, whether it's through interviews or surveys and questionnaires, etc., especially at the top level institutions, those processes can be quite strict given the need for privacy and sort of ethical research, etc. And fantastic that you've got through it, but maybe just walk us through, obviously you said that the milestones were very different, in terms of your expectations, and I certainly had exactly the same experience. And I guess it's just a step that you have to get through, and it's kind of a ticket to the game. And then after that, you can get into the real interesting aspects of doing the actual research and getting all these incredible insights. But maybe just people considering doing this type of research, like both of us have done, slightly more sort of human focused, and in the business world potentially, maybe just walk us through then what that looks like in terms of the ethics process and the panel that you mentioned, and I presume you had a proposal as well. So maybe just break it down into the practical steps that you went through, and then maybe the learnings out of those as to what you could possibly have done differently to maybe speed it up or manage your own expectations better. I think that would just be incredibly useful for people, going into that process or at an early stage of their PhDs.
Okay. There's two very clear milestones, one being your proposal panel, and the second being your ethics approval. From a PhD panel or proposal, you obviously submit a proposal through your application process, and what you go through in your first year is a process of, for many students, understanding how to write, which is, I think, a very critical component, because the way you write in your PhD is somewhat different to that of your master's. I think they expect more critical writing. They expect the weaving of different perspectives before you synthesize your own perspective in relation to the topic. It's to be very clear about the value of your research, not so much in the business context, because generally when you have formulating your topic, you're always looking at it through a business lens in terms of the value that it could contribute to a business at large, or society at large. But actually, what you find is that when you're doing your PhD, the academic value that your topic and your research provides is far more valued, and it's the lens that they actually evaluate whether your research will have credibility at the end. And they take you through a very rigorous process from a panel perspective, and they ask you, generally when you're doing your master's, they scrutinize your topic, they scrutinize your approach. But when you go through your PhD, your panel is significantly larger. It's quite diverse in terms of the people that are represented on that panel, and the rigor in which they go through every section of your proposal is what really puts you under pressure, really stress tests the gaps in your thinking, for your first 3 chapters of your thesis. And I think that's where, both from a writing perspective, but equally understanding the end goal, understanding your research gaps, is where you are definitely pushed through your paces, and where you find, as I said, in hindsight, when you look at it, you go, oh, that has been a fantastic process, because you now have better confidence going into your research study. But when you're going through the process, and it can be quite disappointing at points when you see value and they don't, or when you need to augment your theoretical model in order to incorporate, I guess, more unique, a greater degree of uniqueness in your studies, extending your research or broadening your research. I think for me, it was broadening my research into a larger subset of banks within the financial services, which then created a quite a different problem for me, which is when you went through ethics, and especially when you're testing within the banking industry, and they know that access to employees within the banking industry, the POPI Act, all prevents easy sampling of employees within the banking industry, and therefore the ethics requirements are even at a slightly elevated level, which then requires you to get approval from each of the institutes as a whole in order for you to even engage with the employees. Not that they are giving you access to the employees database, because that's not allowed, but the fact that you can even approach the employees and ask them to participate in the survey, which is completely up to the employee at the end of the day, but you still require those prior approvals from the organization, and that created a different level of complexity. And given that I'm doing a quantitative study, which requires a significant amount of participants, I think it's 450 participants, it also becomes a very daunting task, because the ethics board also requires you to theoretically prove that you will be able to get 450 people to at least participate in your survey, or to be reached. So different levels of complexity as you go through it.
Fascinating, Thanusha. I mean, I think this is just so useful for people to get a sense of what they can expect when they go into something like this. I want to just rewind a little bit back to you talked about just your thinking in terms of the first 3 chapters, which I would presume, and I think what I teach a lot in my courses and when I coach my students is often to think about that end goal in mind. And really, when you submit your final report or dissertation, there's primarily those 5 main sections, and I just want to check with you and maybe get your sort of thinking about it. But those first 3 chapters, your introduction, literature survey, and then methodology, I would presume that's what you're talking about. I guess a lot of that work is what you can do up front and through your proposal, and which, as you said, is stress tested by the panel. And then the rest of your research really fills out then the 4th and 5th section, which is then your results and findings, and then your sort of application conclusion and contributions at the end, obviously still going back to those first 3 chapters to bring them up to date and, just make them current in terms of where you've landed at the, the end of your research, etc. But just maybe frame that, from your perspective in those 3 chapters, and then maybe what you could do is just then, go into that topic that you mentioned about the writing, because I also see that as something that many students struggle. So yeah, those first 3 chapters, and then the writing aspect that you said has been also a learning curve for yourself.
So in terms of the first 3 chapters, obviously your proposal has to be, well, the expectation was that it was fairly comprehensive. If you look at most masters, I think you kind of end up with your entire thesis being around 120 pages to about 150. I think my first 3 chapters are sitting currently at 150 pages. I think what my aim is to really make my chapter 1 and chapter 3 very comprehensive, so that I only actually really go back to it, once concluding on my research. Chapter 2, although very comprehensive at this point in time, in terms of understanding the relationships, having a clear theoretical framework for my research, clear theoretical and empirical models associated with it. I think, the research, I think if I look at it now, in terms of that particular chapter, is probably sitting around 50 pages at this point in time. But looking and referencing the style of my supervisor, the style he applied, because I have the same supervisor for my master's and my PhD, applying the same type of rigor that I went through in my master's. I'm presuming, and looking at some of his past students, I'm looking at that my chapter 2 actually needs to be expanded a little bit more. So looking at potentially doubling that as a reference point. And it's because the thinking around chapter 2, very much in the way that I've been schooled, is a funnel. So a very, having both the depth and the breadth in that funnel is key from a literature review. And therefore, at the moment, as I'm doing my research study and getting people to participate in my survey, I'm actually expanding my literature review in order to get the depth that is required as well. But luckily, the framework is there. Exactly, you've got your key relationships that prove it. You just need to expand it and do that funnel perspective. So that's where I am on that. From a chapter 3 perspective as well, extremely comprehensive. When I went to panel, looked at the methodology in excessive detail. I'm using structural equation modeling, but PLS, the PLS version of it. So very happy with chapter 3 and 1, fairly. Chapter 2 requires always. I find that chapter 2 is where I always find it the most difficult to complete. It is for just my style where most amount of work is associated. I find the methodology section, just because from my engineering and statistic background, I find chapter 3, and when you get to the actual analysis of your data, the insights that are derived from that analysis, I really find those sections really fun. And the most interesting part, and actually really easy for me. As much as I would get somebody to do my statistics for me, just to ensure it's professional, the quality, I equally do it on my own as well, because stats has been a strength of mine from my university days. And equally, when I did my master's, I kind of did a parallel process of myself doing the statistics, but also getting a professional to do it as well, to compare, to learn and grow as well, in order for me to be able to utilize the tools required. And so I really find those sections really exciting. Chapter 2 is where, for me, generally is a lot of hard work that is required in that. From a writing perspective, I guess my advantage was that even during my master's, and especially from my actual, I would say, day job, I do have to, the quality of writing that you do, critical thinking is part and parcel of my job. So I've transferred that into my PhD world, I think. But you never can underestimate what is required when they say critical thinking, right? It's almost it has to be apparent in every single page. It's not just about writing and writing well. It's about writing critically, which is where I would say the differential is, and where the uplift is required, because it's something that you have to be conscious about when you're writing until it becomes habit. So and I think where I generally, I guess, because at points in time you're so focused on getting through a milestone, whether it's getting through panel, and then you leaving writing, and you're dealing with another milestone, which is ethics, and you're dealing with another milestone, which is actually getting participants for your research. If you leave writing during those moments in time, what becomes difficult is when you go back to it, because you almost need to train your brain again to say, okay, I need to write critically, throughout my research, not just in points of it. I think when I picked it up after, leaving it for a few weeks, I kind of had a writer's block, because you're trying to think, okay, what were you saying, and what was the essence of where you were in your research, and picking up, because you're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. You're actually deepening what you've already written. And as much as I have a plan of how I'm going to deepen my chapter 2, when you leave it, you have a problem getting back into it and integrate your thinking back into your PhD. So yes, not easy.
Yep, not easy, Thanusha. That is so insightful. And I mean, one of the things that is so important for people to think about at a postgraduate level is, and I think you touched on many of those of these types of points, is to write often, to write early, as you are doing, and I think as one has to be successful at this level, and then obviously to write well. And there's a skill to writing, which only gets better with practice, and as you say, almost making it a habit. And helpful, as you've said, that it's part of your job as well to write as well as you can and critically, and that, as you say, has sort of transferred well into your PhD, which is excellent. So this important topic of writing, which I try and emphasize so much with the students that I coach, I think is something, it sounds like you're doing very well. So I think you're on a good journey there. I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned. Just a lot of people struggle with their supervisor relationship. Now, you mentioned that you had the same supervisor in your master's, and I would imagine that's, I would suppose, a good advantage, having had a bit of some history and some familiarity with your supervisor. Whereas for many students going into PhD, then that's also something they have to acclimatize with and get used to, as well as get through many of these other milestones at the early stage of their research. So your thoughts on just being a supervisor and the importance of getting that right in terms of being successful at your level of doing research?
A supervisor, I think, is a very critical relationship in your journey. I think and as I mentioned, the style of your supervisor also plays a big role in the end product, because I noticed that in my master's, different styles of supervisors expected different outputs from the students in relation to specifically chapter 2. Actually, some supervisors like a very, I would say, very a synthesized version of chapter 2, ensuring that your critical relationships have been proved, but you don't necessarily need to do the funnel as extensively in terms of the depth and breadth, or comprehensively. Whereas my supervisor had an expectation of it, that when you do it, you have to be able to utilize this funnel approach in order for you to be able to pass, I guess, his threshold in relation to chapter 2. And for me, what was critical in the masters and my supervisor, his ways of working, it's a little bit different to others, right? And it's very, it's actually at a very personal level. It's not that you have a one supervisor fits all. You have to be able to understand how their ways of working and vice versa, and be able to understand how to operate within their ways of working. So for me, my master's helped me understand the ways of working. And I tend to have a different approach in my PhD, which is, utilizing the same ways of working, but, and which is, I reach out when I need something, and I reach out excessively when I'm in trouble. But I'm not one to want to meet you every single week or every single month. I'm not that person. And luckily, he doesn't expect me to be that type of student either. But the converse is true as well. And especially when I was going through panel, and I needed to engage with them extensively because there were moments where I was struggling. I was like, oh, I can't, I understand the comments, coming through in terms of what I need to do, but I don't know how to do it. And, he's coaching because he can't give you the answer. He's coaching and he's mentoring during that period from an emotional perspective as well as from an academic perspective was extremely important to me. And that is what he does really well. So he coaches you and mentors you emotionally, and gives you the confidence that you can do something. And you do have the answer. You just need to think about it a little bit more, and you need to widen your viewpoint. And he's there when you need him. And sometimes, as I said, when you when you stuck, you need him, I guess, a lot during that period of time. And there are moments when I don't need him at all for months because I'm fine. And he's completely okay with that type of relationship. And we have seemed to find a ways of working that works for us. And I guess I'm lucky because I have, and I know that a lot of people struggle with their supervisors. And I think for me, my master's helped me, having the same supervisor, understanding how he works and him understanding me, it really helped. So that's the part. And I think for me, where I saw, not so much in my master's, but where I find, the additional value, as I said, is the emotional coaching and self-confidence that he helps you with. Because, whereas your master's, as I said, I found it fairly easy. There are points in your PhD where you need somebody to tell you, you're almost there, or you got it. Just take a step back, think about it. Because there was a point where, as I said, I didn't know how to do it. I was like, yeah, I get what you want, but I don't know how to do it.
Thanusha, fantastic. Any tips, for people listening in that perhaps are going into a relationship with a supervisor or are struggling with one? What would you suggest are some practical techniques and ways that they can take action, as soon as possible to make improvements, to the degree that they can influence the relationship? Obviously, as you say, it is two-sided, but presuming both want to make it work. From a student perspective, what tips or ideas would you have for people to do things better as a student?
I think the one thing is, and obviously I have, I come from a point of being, I think, blessed in the sense that I had my supervisor from my master's. But I think if you've got your supervisor for the very first time, I think value, and especially because the degree of the way they interact with you is slightly different in your PhD versus your master's. The first thing that I would do is kind of research previous students that have worked really well with that type of supervisor, understand what the quality and the expectations of the report is at the end of the day, and understand from that previous student the ways of working. So how does the supervisor work? How does he interact? What is his expectations on you? I think if you understand that from an onset perspective, you're in a better position. And then obviously, I would say, if it's your first, the first time you're engaging, to establish if that doesn't work for you to a certain degree, either reconfirming the ways of working or, suggesting some tweaks that could work better for you. Like, for instance, if you are working with my supervisor, but you require, I would say, significantly more interaction than I require, because mine is on a needs basis. And you'd rather have catch-ups on a regular basis, you probably need to indicate that upfront and say, I would prefer engaging or catching up once a month or twice a month. And even if it's not that I have anything more material to show you or evidence, it's just I'd like to just have a general conversation around the research domain, or to discuss an article with you. But I think you need to establish that immediately with your supervisor. I think if you don't, this is where, and generally this is advice with any, I guess, from a corporate arena perspective, every leader has a different style, and understanding what that style is and being able to work with that style is crucial to the success of that relationship. And my advice is, since you won't know what the style of that supervisor is immediately, being able to get a previous student to provide those insights, to look at a few examples of previous PhD students that have been successful with that supervisor, gives you direction and guidance in terms of what is his or her particular expectations, because they do have nuances.
That is such good advice, Thanusha. I mean, I hadn't really thought through that type of research to get off on the right footing with your supervisor. One of the things I did in my PhD, and I actually had 3 supervisors, so it was quite tricky because it was a fairly interdisciplinary study.
Yes.
So I, just in terms of researching my supervisors, looked at their own PhD theses and what they originally submitted, and was the basis for their own qualifications. And there were some vast differences across the 3 of them, but it gave me some quite unique insights, certainly from a writing perspective. I mean, I think your ways of working aspects, will come through, the other students that they supervise, but from a writing perspective and a discipline, or the rigor, as you say, of the academic process, that was incredibly useful. And I sort of had their 3 dissertations as almost quick links on my computer, so I could very quickly just go in and have a look at any sort of specific section or approach that they took, and that just helped me, I think, just be in a better position when I then spoke to them about a problem I was having or guidance that I needed, or when they gave me comment on something, I could understand where it was coming from, I suppose. So would you say that's maybe also something as well for students to consider?
Absolutely. I think trying to get into the headspace of your supervisor, and I guess I looked at it from understanding the headspace and the expectations through previous students, but what I didn't consider was actually looking at their own PhD study. But that would be actually perfect, because I guess it stems from there. because their advice going forward actually stems from the way that they think, and the set of expectations around it. So yeah, that's actually a good tip, and I'm going to use it.
There we go. And to our listeners, so any listeners that have got supervisors studying at a postgraduate level, there's 2 practical things that you can do to improve your supervisor relationship. One from Thanusha was just maybe go and have a look at previous students and just get a sense of the ways of working. And I suppose, Thanusha, you were a previous student of that supervisor, given that it was the same one between your master's and your PhD. And then, from my side, just go and read up on your supervisor's own PhD final reports or dissertations, or maybe articles or other writing that they've done. So there's some actions that you as listeners can take as a result of this interview, which I think is fantastic and part of the value that we want to offer to you through the Student Success Coach. Thanusha, just wrapping up then, the last couple of questions. I mean, just looking forward now, obviously you've calibrated your expectations, I think, in terms of the realities of doing a PhD and what that's actually going to take. Would you say your priorities and approach has changed somewhat going into now, if I could call it perhaps the middle stages of your PhD, and what does that look like for you in the next, I suppose, year or more of getting these 450 people to complete your survey and then to do all the statistical structural equation analysis, etc. What's kind of your mindset now going into that stage of your PhD?
I think I always have unrealistic expectations. So let me be really honest, Peter. I don't think I've ever learned from that one. So even with my 450, I have this unrealistic view that it's going to be over a short period of time that I'm going to be able to get people to fill out my survey. And then I get disappointed through the process, I guess, because I have this view that I'd like to complete my my research study by a certain period of time, and then I guess it's when you aim, it's the viewpoint. If you aim for the stars and you land on the clouds, sort of scenario, you're a little bit better and you're pushing yourself. But I guess it comes with a little bit of disappointment throughout it. I think my main focus over going through the December break and into Jan is to definitely try to push as many of my but to push my participant rate higher. As I said, it's fairly low at this point in time. So that is I think a big focus for me for the end of this year, moving into Q1. But simultaneously, it's about completing chapter 2 for me. So by doing the dual approach, it feels like I'm making progress on my overall thesis, as much as I feel like I'm waiting for people to participate in my research. So I'm not wasting too much time. So that would be my true aim. As I said, I'm really looking forward to that point where I can move from out of my research study into the actual analysis, because I think that would definitely consume me, but it would be great because I would throw myself into the actual analysis, and I feel like that period of time will be an accelerated period of time for me, because when you enjoy something, it really comes easier. And I'm really looking forward to understanding what the results are more than anything else. But I guess the hard yards for me is getting people to participate. So if there are any of your listeners that are part of the top 5 banks in South Africa that would like to generously participate in my study, it takes about circa 20 minutes. Please reach out and help me give the ultimate gift of giving to a PhD student, which is to participate in their studies. They would help me a lot. So that's really, I'm kind of just focused on the next quarter. And for me, that's, as I said, be it in my master's or be it here, that's where my heavy lifting lies. And then the rest becomes, I guess, exciting moments, and then I guess at the end becomes frustrating moments when you go through reviews with your supervisor and you have to do tweaks and changes. But I guess that's all part of this PhD journey. And I guess if it was easy, everybody would do it. And I realized that being in the process rather than actually before I entered the program.
Yeah, Thanusha, I mean, you talk about the journey and the process, and I mean, I think it is a wonderful journey, and there are, those enjoyable and fulfilling moments, but you almost have to pay a bit of a price to get them and to get there. Just like climbing any mountain or completing any journey, I think, the view from the top is going to be always better when, you've exerted and sacrificed a bit to get up there. And on the topic of participants for your survey, absolutely. I mean, I've sent you one right now, so I think reach out and he will be very helpful, and may have a few others that you could pass on. And maybe just to pause on that, I mean, one important thing for the sort of more quantitative studies on humans is the snowball effect, where, getting contacts for completing your surveys are people that themselves also have contacts who are also willing and likely and suitable participants. So, I found that very useful in my own research, where I only had to do 25, one-on-one interviews, given it was a qualitative study, but, chatting to people opened up, other people that then, were willing and able to do interviews with me. So I'm sure that's something that you're finding quite useful. And for people listening in, that snowball effect can also be quite powerful to get a sufficient sample size for your study. So Thanusha, thank you. And I mean, any last thoughts on the academic journey and career that you've had, and the contribution that it's made, maybe to yourself, your family, personally, professionally? You said earlier that the bug bit you fairly early on, and it sounds very similar to myself. Enjoying that critical thinking, enjoying asking tough questions, and going through a rigorous process to get very valuable answers and make a contribution to society. How much has it meant to you over the years to pursue, these academic studies and take on this extra work and the extra sacrifice and time that it has required? Has it been worth it to you along the way? And what are your thoughts on that for our listeners?
Absolutely. I think, when you cross that mountain or you climb that mountain, it's definitely an exceptionally rewarding process. But I think for me, it's not just the end result in terms of the research and the contribution you can make to business, which is why I think you actually go out and actually want to pursue this journey. It's actually the learning that you enjoy through the experience. So if you enjoy learning and you enjoy the personal growth that you get through the process, I think any of these studies, be it a master's or a PhD, should be a must. As much as you learn through the experience of reading, be it in my field, a Harvard Business Review, or many other publications, I think I've learned that even in my own team, I really want somebody that, from a research perspective, that has done their master's or their PhD, because that they approach the domain of research and R&D in a highly comprehensive manner, and you're really getting the best value. So firstly, it's helped me identify people that I want on my team and the type of skills that I want on my team. It's helped me personally grow, emotionally grow, and it's helped me from a learning perspective, because I believe that when you look at and analyze the full discipline, you are able to understand answers, the pressure points within the domain, the shortcomings within that domain, as well as I guess the end goal, which is you're utilizing what you've learned and applying it either in your personal or your professional life, is a very key component of that journey, and I guess your own life cycle with respect to learning. So yeah, I would recommend it, but it's definitely at points in time. I guess you got me on a good day, Peter, and I'm saying yes, I recommend it.
Well, I'm so glad we timed the interview perfectly. So, Thanusha, yeah, thank you, and just great to get you in that positive frame of mind about a PhD, because that's what we want for our listeners to be, ultimately in a positive mindset that even though there are the ups and downs, sort of sustains them, and they get some encouragement from other people that have been, through the journey and are authentic to acknowledge that it is difficult. And that's what I really appreciate from, our time together in this chat today. And that even though those bad days will come and the mindset, does dip down a little bit, as you said, there's the supervisor, there's coaching, there's other students and colleagues, etc., that you can always reach out to. And if you have that firm vision and your sort of eye on the prize or the end goal, and you're passionate about it, and you've chosen a topic that will sort of pull you through the long haul, then you should ultimately achieve your own definition of student success. So Thanusha, thank you so much, and I wish you well. And from all our listeners, I hope you get some people signing up as a result of today's chat. And as I say, I've sent you one, and I'll keep popping through a few more to help you out, and just do everything that we can to contribute. So thank you, and Thanusha, good luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Peter, and a good day to all your listeners, and I hope that they found some value in my conversation or rambling for the during this morning.
No, thank you very much, Thanusha. It's been absolutely brilliant. So good luck with the PhD and all the best. Chat soon.